Welcome to The Magic of Positive Thinking, a podcast hosted by Norb Svanascini, founder of AmericanEagle.com, and content writer Al Edwards. Norb, happy day. Happy podcast day. How are you?
I'm wonderful. It's an incredibly beautiful day. I mean, this is halfway through November, and, being from Chicago, you're used to feeling winter already.
Right.
But we have had probably the best fall I've ever remember. And it's actually, much better to give thanks to God every day. And I'm giving thanks for the first 15 days of November, all at once. It's a heck of a present. 15 days present.
Absolutely.
Beautiful day.
Well, I want to tell you something. I have been inspired by our own podcast. And in my busy days, I have multiple times stopped and looked around at the beautiful orange and yellow leaves and took a deep breath and said, wow, it is great to be alive.
Yeah, it really is. And I was reading the other day an article that it said that most people in the world today are walking zombies. And when you think about it, it's kind of sad that, a zombie, it's scary, and it should be, but they also don't see anything.
Exactly.
And the fall colors this year have been really, really beautiful. I don't know if it's because of the little rain we've had or what it is, but it's really beautiful. And it's really nice to see things like this and appreciate them.
Zombies are dead to the world, and that's the exact opposite that we need to be. We need to look around and be alive.
Exactly, yeah.
And see and be grateful for the world around us. There's no question about that. But I just wanted to mention that our own podcast inspires me to remember to do things like that because we're all in the same boat.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy because Al and I obviously listen to our podcasts, and that adds a lot to the viewership to our.
Exactly.
And some of them are really good. In fact, the last 2 or 3 we did, I'm very proud of them. And if you haven't listened to them, I really recommend it. And if you don't like them, send us a note or something because we'd like to know.
Exactly. Well, of the 1,000 downloads that we've gotten, 889 of them have been Norb and me. So, that's the thing. Well, friends, we have a very exciting show for you today because, as usual, Norb comes up with some great ideas on some of our shows. And he came across a study from NASA, believe it or not. And we all know NASA shooting the rockets up into the sky. And these are the same people who had the audacity to put a man on the moon with a Commodore 64 as their navigation system in 1969. And the math actually worked, and they've come a long way since then. But there was a study, and it has to do with children and the creative genius that we're all born with and what happens to that. So let me go through this a little bit, Norb, and I want to get your initial reactions to it. A test was administered to 1,600 4- and 5-year-olds. Of the 1,600, 98% of them scored at the creative genius level.
Yeah, and I think that's very important to interrupt you.
Sure.
98%. That means out of 100, 98 of them were creative geniuses.
Right.
Now, Al will continue with the study. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that.
Yeah.
Everybody almost is born a genius.
Correct. Out of 100 people, 98 of these kids were creative genius on the score level. 5 years later, the test was administered again to the same group of children. This time, only 30% scored at the same level. 5 years later, the children now in their teens, the test was administered again, and now it went from 98% to 30% 5 years later, and then in their mid-teens, only 12% scored at the creative genius level. So, friends, what happened there? And the bottom line that happened there is that all of us through our educational systems, through socializations, we are boxed in our thinking. And Norb, how did that strike you so deeply when you heard about this, of all of us being conditioned to think within boxes?
Well, it's kind of interesting because, when I first read about this thing, and I shared it with Al immediately, and obviously we talked about it, we were both amazed about, first of all, this is from NASA. This isn't some Mickey Mouse outfit that did this study. This was very sophisticated by one of the greatest scientific gatherings of minds in the world. So, these facts and figures that we give you are based on facts. In fact, you can even, do a Google on this and see that it's true. Now, think about the implications here and think about what causes this. This is the interesting part about it. Every kid, just about 98 out of 100, is rated as a creative genius. Now, that doesn't mean that they're geniuses. It means that their creativity is the same as a genius. And let's face it, there's a lot of geniuses out there that aren't worth a shoe.
Right.
But, to be creative is very important. And we always bring Henry Ford and Thomas Edison in our talks, but, Thomas Edison was a very creative type person who, when he was young, everybody thought he was an idiot. However, because everybody thought he was an idiot, nobody taught him anything. He had a mind that was undisturbed by all of the things that society imposes on your thinking. Now, there are some things that are imposed that are very good, but there are some, obviously, that basically harm the creative spirit. If a person is taught, something that is according to somebody's basis of what's right and what's wrong, without giving this child the ability to think whether he likes that or not, then that creativity is destroyed because he wasn't given the opportunity to say, I don't think that's right, and when I say he, I don't mean to be discriminatory against girls. I think obviously in the 98%, there are an equal amount of girls. And it's very interesting that the creative level, you're born with it. And going back to our idol, Earl Nightingale, your mind is like soil, and whatever you put into it, it will give you back. So if anything gets out of this, please just remember when you have a child, let their mind roam free. It's the best gift you can give to a child, and get them interested in actually exercising that brain. And whenever you say something, think, is this going to affect them or her in a negative way? Because if you tell them, look, this is what I believe, but there's somebody else that believes it this way, and what do you think? And this is the creative factor you don't want to destroy in a child.
Right.
So basically that's very important. Now, we're here at a teenager, and only 12% score the creative geniuses. And obviously we know that when they grow up to be adults, I don't know if there is a percentage, but I would guess it's very low, in the low single digits.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we're all biased. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think any one of us can be totally unbiased, but I think the goal would be to exercise this incredible brain you have to be creative and think outside the box,
Absolutely. And let's dig into that a little bit more, because you're exactly right. And the first thing I want to point out very, very clearly is we're going to talk about our educational systems and schools and things of that nature. I want everyone to understand one thing. We are not being critical or ripping on teachers or anything like that. Teachers are wonderful. They're needed more than ever. But teachers, just like the rest of us, are conditioned and are boxed, and they're doing the best they can. So please, everything we say, we are not being critical of teachers. We're trying to expand our minds to think about things in a new way. So when we talk about it going down to 12%, the creative genius level, it says here, the first thing that comes to mind, and the answer that seems most glaringly obvious, is that kids between the ages of 5 and 15 are sitting in classrooms for 8 hours a day, supposedly learning valuable skills that will help prepare them for the rest of their lives. Schools are set up like factories. They process kids through a one-size-fits-all educational pipeline that leaves little room for a divergent thought. The focus is on convergent thinking. Here's some information, memorize it, and we'll make you take a test to make sure it's stuck. And when I was in high school, Norb, I'll never forget, I had an earth science professor. His name was Dr. Hubble. And we were going into the prehistoric days, and we had all this incredible stuff that we had to memorize. And I said to him one day, I was 16, Dr. Hubble, do I have to memorize all the names of these dinosaurs and all this stuff? And he said something to me I never forgot, and that was, don't memorize it, understand it. And that's, I think, what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I think it's some people really like school, and they go to school, and obviously they learn a lot. Some of us, I hate to confess this, I would probably commit suicide if I have to go through school again, because I did not like it.
Right.
I was always an avid reader, and obviously with Earl Nightingale's that I learned at a young age, I thought that expanding my mind was the thing to do. And when you sit in a school for 8 hours a day and you listen to the teachers, just talk in this monotone type of voice, and you basically just want to wait for that bell to ring,
right,
so you can get the heck out of there. It's really very sad. And I think that, again, Al said something very important. We're not against teachers, or we're not against education. I definitely believe in it. But I think there should be a more open mind to teach these kids to be positive, to open that magic that they had when they were 4 or 5 years old. And it is magical to know that 98 out of 100 of these children were geniuses. And they actually had a mind that was exploding.
Including the teachers, by the way.
Including the teachers. Yes,
right.
Yes. So it's kind of exciting. When we read this, we were both, wow, this is really something, because I hope that people can understand that we really believe in education, but we believe that education should be geared for what that child is interested in. Because obviously the thing about the dinosaurs was very good. I remember things that, because I like cars, I remember the cubic displacement of a Ford flathead engine. and most people could care less about that. And I don't blame them. But, it's something that I know because I was interested in it.
Right.
But in school, they make you memorize that, even if you're a girl or a guy that doesn't want to know about cars. And this is basically the flaw in putting your mind in a semi-prison, so to speak.
Exactly. We are not against education. What we're trying to talk about is thinking without limits.
Exactly.
Without putting our thinking in a box.
And the magic of being able to think, which becomes positive, because, listen, it's very simple. What you like is not negative. It's positive. Whatever you like, whatever you're interested in.
Absolutely. And that old expression, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Absolutely.
Right?
Right.
Well, to further those ideas, this study further went on to say that their conclusion was that there's not much room for questioning, for dreaming, or for creating for young minds in the educational system. Sure, younger kids get some of that in art class or on creative writing assignments, but it certainly isn't the focus of any part of compulsory education to teach kids to think creatively and act on their own unique thoughts and perspective. Just to be clear, the study said, teachers are not the bad guys. They're often just as stuck as we are. The system was designed to operate exactly as it is, stifling creativity and critical thinking and replacing it with memorization and blind obedience to authority. And Norb, we always told the story of Thomas Edison about when he was a kid, one of the biggest criticisms his teacher had, and he was in this one-room schoolhouse kind of environment back then, the biggest criticism he wrote his mother about was that the kid kept asking why all the time. And if you think about you have 9 grandchildren. We've all been around toddlers, little kids. If you notice, small children are constantly asking why, because being on this earth is a new experience for them and everything is new. They are a blank slate and they want to know why things happen the way they do. And we can never lose that sense of why, that sense of wonder about the world.
That's, really, that was beautifully put. And I think that if you just understand that, and again, going to the brain as a piece of soil, it's very important to answer that child. And if you don't know the answer, get him to join you in looking at Google, then find the answer,
right.
or just get him interested in doing something that he wants to know why. Because I have a very good friend that has a kid that is a very bright kid, and he's just a nutcase on football statistics. And this kid knows the statistics of players that played in the 50s and 60s. And I think he's 9 years old. And, this is the thing he really loves. And luckily he's got a father that not only allows him to do this, but actually promotes him.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that's interesting is when a person is happy doing what he likes, then the rest becomes a lot easier because he's not encumbered with these uncomfortable things that you don't want to learn. I, for example, I had to take history in high school and grade school, and I could care less when the Battle of Lexington took place. I could care less. However, today I like it.
Sure.
Okay. But who decided that this has to be taught universally? And this is important because when they give you a test, you got to remember this.
Right.
And when you think about it, who cares? Now, if you do care about it, God bless you. But you're going to learn other things easier if there's not that demand that you have to remember things that you're uncomfortable or you don't care about. Because let's face it, there isn't one human alive that thinks 100% like another human.
Right.
That person doesn't exist.
We're all truly unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why, going back to what you said about, are we put in this schoolroom where we're just there 8 hours a day being fed this thing that somebody decided this is important to you.
Right.
And I don't know if they're aware of this NASA study, but the NASA study says, don't do this.
No, you're exactly right. And the thing of it is, with regard to that, is that I think the original intention of education was, the intention was good to know that Lexington was 17, whatever it happened to be. But what was lost over time, I think, is understanding why Lexington happened. What was the philosophy behind the American Revolution? What were they rebelling against? What was George Washington and the founding fathers trying to put together? That information, internalizing that, understanding that, is what molds a human being, not that it just happened to happened in 1775. I don't even know when it was. It was somewhere around there. What's more important is why it happened and what they were trying to do, and thinking about how does that affect me as a 21st century human being.
Yeah. And, one of the nice things about this is that we know for a fact that creativity is there. Now, the interesting part about this is that, there were 1,600 4 and 5-year-olds. This didn't say there were all whites, 33% blacks, 12% Latino. They didn't say any of this. They said children. And I would imagine that NASA, being the kind of entity that it is, didn't cherry pick all perfect kids.
Right.
So, everybody's got this gift. Everybody. We only use, some people say we only use 10% of our brains, and I think that probably that's on the high side. So, 90% of our brain is basically waiting for us to activate it.
Right.
And the thing that we talk about the magic of positive mental attitude or thinking is that when you think that way, that, wow, I want to look at this because I'm interested in this. It's magical because you're going to discover things that very few people know, whatever it might be.
There's no question about that. And again, we're not here purposefully, criticizing education. What we're trying to do is apply these kind of concepts to our own lives, Norb's life, my life, your life, friends. And how can we break out of this? How can we change our lives starting today in some of these areas? And some of the more progressive advanced teachers are doing some of the things today, like ditching the model where facts are dictated and tests are standardized for an experimental learning environment where kids can get their hands dirty and apply what they're learning to real life scenarios. Multiple choice tests don't reflect the multiple choices in life. Kids should be encouraged to see things from different angles, to find new solutions to old problems, and to create something original from their own unique standpoint. A couple more. Rote learning is not going to cut it anymore in the new age of the 21st century. We need to cultivate agile, creative minds capable of innovation and problem solving in a rapidly changing world. And lastly, instead of cramming information, kids should be mastering a diverse set of skills, communication, critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration that will actually serve them in life.
Yeah, and it basically goes down to, what you put into your mind. And, if you show the kid that he can be creative because he was born with this, and tell him this, something, you were born a genius. And sometimes when you tell somebody this, not only do they feel good, but it's the truth anyway. It's just like when you see a nice little girl. I happen to have a great granddaughter that's just really a cute girl, and when you tell her, "Oh my God, you look pretty," she just brightens up, you
Right.
know. And I'm sure that when she's like 6 or 7 years old, if you tell her, you really have a great mind, and you can really think about this, she'll be just as happy.
Absolutely.
And instilling belief in yourself, it's basically programming yourself.
Yes.
And we allow societies to put us into this box.
Right.
And it's just like fashion. People, most ladies, I know that my wife would never go out unless her purse and her shoes matched.
Right.
And I was very careful whenever she was looking at a new outfit. I would tell her, now, do you have shoes and a purse to match? Because I know that the dress might be X amount, but the shoes and the purse were X times 17. So
you're just trying to save some money, right?
Yeah, right. But no, these are things that people should think about. That what it's a cause and effect. What we're talking about, the choices you make in life.
Right.
And don't be boxed in. We live in this country where probably one of the greatest things about the United States, when you think about it, we had people that left Europe, and the people that were wealthy and well-to-do didn't leave Europe or other parts of the world, by the way. I don't want to just say Europe. They wanted opportunity. So they actually saw the other side. They weren't boxed in that, let's say that they were from a country called Romania. I don't want to name a particular country, but
sounds like a good country.
The Romanians do this, and the Romanians have to act like that, and the Romanians dress like this, and the Romanians go to this church, and the Romanian. So basically, the Romanian has no original thought. Now, here's the Romanian. They come to America,
right,
and all of a sudden they have children. And they say, in America, you can do whatever you want. And even if they try to remain with their Romanian social structure,
right,
the kid, whether a boy or a girl, sees that, there's other things. And God, in America, I can do this and I can do that. So they've gotten out of that boxed in social structure that unluckily, I think most of the world lives under,
Well, first of all, Norb, I'd like to commend you on making up, at the spur of the moment, a completely believable name of a country, Zumania.
Yeah, in fact, I think that if I ever start a country, that's what I would
call it. Zumania.
Yeah, what was the one that Groucho Marx had?
Fredonia.
Yeah,
I was just thinking about that from the great
I actually like Zumania better.
I do too. Of course, Norb is talking about the 1933 picture Duck Soup from the Marx Brothers, and probably you and I are the only ones who have ever heard of that movie.
If you haven't heard about it, we talked about this before on this show, and I think it should be, do this during the day. I mean, today with the wealth of the internet, you can go to YouTube, put Groucho Marx, and just watch some of the stupid stuff this guy did with his two brothers, or three actually.
Right.
And how stupid it was, but it was funny.
Almost 100 years later.
W.C. Fields. The other day I sent Al a thing about W.C. Fields. And, almost no one remembers W.C. Fields. He was just one of the funniest guys in the world. And he said things that, still remain as an American saying. Like, I think he wanted to be buried and on his tombstone it said, I'd rather be here than in Philadelphia. I don't know why. I like Philadelphia, so I'm not against Philadelphia guys.
Right.
But that was one of his famous things. And he was well known as a drinker.
Yes.
And, the reason he didn't drink water is he says, fish swim in that and they do everything in that water. So, it was just one of those things that it was funny.
Right.
But, that's one of the things about being positive. Being positive means to be happy and reinforce this stuff.
Right.
Because this stuff is invaluable to feed your brain with good stuff,
And he was seeing booze as positive because you see, friends, the alcohol would sterilize the germs from the fish poop.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Whereas water possibly had all kinds of toxins in it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, I want to see what you think about this, Norb. I used to think about this a lot. Why is it in the 21st century we have, we had it in the 20th century too, obviously, but, airplanes, cell phones, microwaves, satellites, men on the moon. Why did we have all this today, but we didn't have it 400 or 500 years ago? And I used to think it was because the intellect of human beings at that time was lower than ours. But the truth is, the intellect of people hundreds of years ago was no different than ours. The difference was that we started thinking differently.
Yeah, and in fact, you can prove that the creativity, genius creativity, was there. If you ever go to Rome, the stuff that the Romans built is just beyond belief.
Unbelievable.
In fact, there's a river that runs through Italy called the Arno, which every 20 years or so, and in fact, it just happened, I think, a couple of months ago, it floods and it destroys just about everything in its way. And the interesting part about it, it destroys bridges going across the Arno, but not the Roman-built bridges.
Wow.
So, 2,400 years ago or so, these guys had a lot of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And in Rome, the main sewer line is still in use because actually the Romans had sewers. And if you go to China, they built the Great Wall of China, which, extends 3,000 miles. And I visited that, and the thing that amazed me the most is how wide it was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could have a 2-lane highway on this thing. And, whenever I knew about this or thought about it, I thought it was just a small thing.
Yeah, like a little, yeah.
This thing is huge. And you wonder, my God, who was the engineer? Who did this? So the creativity was always there. But of course, societies minimize these creative people by giving them things that are opinions.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with opinions. We all have them. But you can't have opinions control the creative genius that these children have. And now we know for a fact, one thing that is our difference between us and the Roman times is that today we know that everybody possesses that creative genius.
Right.
Back then they didn't know.
Right, they didn't know that.
So, when Michelangelo did the Sistine Chapel, obviously he was a genius, and I don't know what his background as a child was, but I'm sure that somebody promoted him mentally to the point that he believed he could actually build this dome,
right,
without having an engineering degree or an MBA or anything like that. I mean, he just knew how the heck to do it, because the creative genius was there. And I think what happened in the United States is that when all these people came from other countries, they did not have this structural prison in the children's mind, and they told them, in America, you can do anything.
Right.
So a kid like Thomas Edison or Henry Ford, if they were back in wherever they came from, which is irrelevant, they wouldn't have had that luxury of freedom of thought.
Right.
The creative genius was still intact,
right,
because nobody imposed these ridiculous dogmas that we have today.
And I think this creative genius can be shown in nature too. How does a crow know how to build a nest and use tools and sticks? No, I've never seen a crow at the community college learning about engineering, and it takes us 22 years to figure that out. We're supposed to be the most evolved species. This seems to be part of nature. It's like a divine genius creativity that we all have. Yeah.
Well, I hate to simplify and always bring it back to our subject matter. This is the miracle of positive mental thinking.
Unlimited thinking is synonymous with positive thinking.
It's magical. It's unbelievable. We're blessed to have this knowledge. Whatever you think, whatever your thoughts are, whatever your beliefs are, now we have knowledge, scientifically proven, that children are born 98 out of 100 with genius capabilities. If we can say one thing, Al and I'm sure he shares this thought with me, don't kill this in your children.
Right. And we have the ability as adults to revive that creative genius in ourselves by doing things like ask someone unfamiliar with a certain topic what their thoughts would be about something. Ask yourself, what would I do differently if I had to start from scratch again? Take a piece of paper and write down every idea you can think of, stupid or not, about a particular topic. Just write down 1,000 things, and you'll be amazingly surprised what you come up with.
And the one thing that I think is very important to basically end this thing is it's reversible. You can actually, if you put your mind to it, and again, listen to the strangest secret, because the strangest secret basically holds the secret that you can reprogram your mind. You must say to yourself, I'm going to question why I believe this. Why do I believe this? Be free. And, don't worry about it. One thing about it, sometimes to stand away from the crowd is the most important thing you can do in life. So if everybody believes something, respect them. Don't get violent or aggressive about it. But, your mind is like a piece of soil. Whatever you plant in it will give you back. Don't worry about what people think.
That's exactly right. And friends, let us all highly resolve that we are going to unbox our thinking, unlimit our thinking as adults in our everyday lives, and never, ever, ever stop asking why. And I think we are going to have lives that beyond our imagination.
And why we're saying this is because our time is up.
That's right. So, friends, we hope you enjoyed our show, gave you something to think about, and never stop asking why, and encourage those around you to never stop asking why. So, Norb, always a privilege to be with you.
Amen. Same here.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. God bless.
Friends, we'll see you next time. For Norb Svanascini, this is Al Edwards, and we will definitely see you on our next podcast. Bye-bye.